One of the reasons that I use Russian literature is, well, one is because that's the area that I'm an expert in, but also Russian literature lends itself to the kinds of questions that really work in this environment.
What is happiness? What makes for a successful life? Given that we're going to live, given that we're going to die, how should we live?
We talked about what it meant for them to be happy, what it meant for, what is the meaning of life for them.
There's one accursed question, which is selfless love possible? And I had always thought of that as like the philosophical debate whether altruism exists or not. You know, like, do you do something that's good because you want to look good in front of others, or do you do it because it's completely selfless love?
The last day of class, we have a sharing. Some students and some residents share with the whole group what they got out of the program. And a resident got up and he said, all right, let's just be real about this. You know, where I come from, Russian literature is not popular. But what was kind of cool is that I discovered Russian literature. I discovered that it's really interesting and fun and not all depressing, and that it's relevant to my life.
One of our residents, Jay, got really animated when I asked them if selfless love is possible, and he was like, of course. Is there anyone in your life that you would lay down your life for? Like anyone at all? And I kind of didn't know what to say, because I would like to think that of course I could, but I don't know. And I was like, well, what about you? And he was like, of course. You know, like my sister, her kids, you know, anyone in my family, of course. And for me, that was just like, all right, well, that question's solved. You know, like I might not be able to lay down my life for someone, but if Jay is, then selfless love is possible.
I also choose works that are going to stretch residents a little bit, so they want to be stretched. They don't want to just read the easy works.
One of the people in my group, he kept asking about college and what it was like, because he had been incarcerated for almost 7 years, since the time he was 12, and so he hasn't really seen the world.
You know, it just really shows how incredible these guys are and how much they have to bring to the table, but you know, are in this system that is so dehumanizing and so like boring. You know, they don't get any intellectual stimulation.
The lack of education is one of the big reasons that, you know, we have the problem that we do with juvenile delinquency and with these residents returning to the facilities, recidivism.
One story comes to mind when it comes to like really fruitful discussion was The Overcoat by Gogol. And we talk, the main character in the story is like this pathetic little old man who all he ever wants in life is just, he's a copier, and all he wants to just copy. He wants to be left alone.
So one of the stories that we read was called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is about a man who is a pretty miserable guy but doesn't realize it. He does everything because it's proper, and he has a wife he doesn't really love, and a family he doesn't really love, who doesn't really love him back. And he just starts to die for some unknown reason, and he just dies and dies and dies throughout the whole story.
I thought that he was happy, like he knew true happiness, and that was the question, like, do you think that he knows true happiness? And the residents were like, no, he's copying, like that's not true happiness. He doesn't, like, he's not truly happy. How could you ever be happy just copying papers?
The guys really connected to that story, I think more than any other story that we read. And I think it was because of that accursed question, given that I'm going to die, how should I live?
I'm like, but that's all he knows, and he finds joy in that. And just having like that back and forth, like the disagreement, I think my favorite part was the disagreement.
We had them, one of our activities for that discussion was we had them make bucket lists in terms of like, or we all made bucket lists. What do we want to do before we die? And they had some really incredible answers. I mean, one guy, Gabriel, he wanted to do almost everything. He wanted to travel over every piece of land. He wanted to own every animal as a pet. He wanted to learn every language. And he wanted to learn so much that he starts to forget.
Like, we reached a level of friendship, and in some respects, more intimate than like people that I've met here or anywhere else, because we had like those in-depth conversations and those critical questions about life.
He said that one of the biggest challenges that he had in taking the class was worrying what we were going to think of him and how we were going to judge him and the other residents. But he said that that fear was like allayed by the second session, because he said you can just tell by the way somebody talks to you what they're thinking of you.
He said, when you guys came here, we thought you were going to treat us like criminals, but you treated us like people and like students. And so once a week, we got to be human.